I think James Rubio said it was like, he's like, don't forget, you know, art was happening before bread was being made and before wheels were around. And I was like, oh, good point, good point. He said, this stuff is necessary.
I thought I saw you late last night in Brooklyn,
Okay, so what made you
So it was
decide
the-
that was the spot?
Oh, as far as like moving the gallery? Okay, so it was kind of interesting because had 2 locations in East Village,
I
as you
know,
know,
that
and
was a
stuff like
little
this.
rough.
And that was well, it's really hard
To have
logistically.
the double openings were just like, I kind of feel like your audiences were always split, like which gallery are you going to go to?
That
Or
was-
someone had to
yeah,
be
yeah,
in one,
yeah.
someone had to be in the other.
Well,
or having them, you know, I know at some point it was also like, was it my show or one of the shows where it was just, you know, it opened
Well, you had a double
on
show, yeah.
4th Street and then 2 weeks later it opened on
opened on
3rd.
3rd
But I
Street.
think mine might have.
That was yours.
That was mine.
That was
right?
yours.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
When I opened the gallery in Harlem, at the very end of 2018, beginning of 2019, that was kind of interesting because that was like nice location. The ceilings were a little bit lower than I'd wanted to. The square footage was kind of decent, but like
Yeah, it was pretty good.
whatever.
It was a pretty
But then
good
it was all the
space.
way up in Harlem, so there was like kind of big location asterisks.
But at that point, all that stuff was. Like, Gavin Brown was up there.
Right, that's true.
That big, you know, Columbia gallery.
Wallach Gallery was up there.
Yeah, it was up there. There's a lot of stuff happening up there.
Yeah.
And a lot of interesting stuff. It just, I think it was the pandemic, right? That's when you like.
Okay, that
right,
is
the
true.
pandemic stuff started winding down. White Box was up there.
White Box was up there.
Right,
David
there's a
Richard
bunch
was
of
up
stuff,
there. There was a
yeah.
lot of the.
And then you were making that map and stuff, and so I
We
feel
were
like
trying to do
things
the
were
Harlem
like
Art
starting
Walk.
to happen, and then I think the pandemic kind of shut down that whole Harlem.
Yeah, that was
You
kind
know,
of
a lot of
interesting
people
how
pulled
that
out,
happened.
right?
Well,
like
I think
Gavin
there was.
Brown is gone,
He
right?
left.
Yeah.
He left.
He had
That
the
was.
biggest space.
I feel like that was in part for 3 reasons. I mean, mainly absolutely the pandemic kind of like set
Yeah.
it backwards in a way, but it was kind of like at that time, real estate in New York had become so kind of expensive everywhere else, and so that was the last place in Manhattan that was like in
Right,
any
right.
way accessible
okay, so
to
wait,
the arts.
here's a question.
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, the pandemic happened.
Yep.
And then it seems to me like all these galleries opened up like in Tribeca, which is great. You know, I mean, it just seems like there's just a lot more suddenly, you know, happening. That, you know, it was like a little bit more staged
Well-
pre-pandemic, and then I feel like everything shut down for 100 days. There are no galleries, no museums, and I kind of just feel like, you know, that the whole art world, you know, just pivoted, shifted at that moment. You know, when it opened up, it was a whole other art scene. I think everyone was thinking about art in a really different way.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of different conversations were opening up about,
right,
you
right.
know, I mean, at the exact moment, it was like identity art kind of stuff. But then
Right.
I just feel like more than that, it's just blowing open the, okay, who is making the narrative in art history, and
Yeah.
and you know, and what do we think about that? And now it's just like everyone else is like being able to like have a voice, you know, and like there's the woman who wrote this whole book about, you
Yeah.
know, art history if there were no men, you know, like
right,
women's
right,
art
right,
history,
right.
right? So there's like a lot of stuff going on that I feel was not happening, you know, pre-pandemic, and so.
If you remember, right before the pandemic, major retailers like Sears and stuff like this had just gone for bankruptcy, as well as other things like Fairway
Oh, right, yeah.
also filed for chapter like, I forget which type of bankruptcy, but a type of bankruptcy
Right,
where they
right.
could like keep some locations open. But a lot of major kind of retail was already trending out, just naturally.
Right.
And then the pandemic kind of like was metaphorically like the dagger in that. And then I think whenever there's major shifts, it creates space, and typically the most easily able to kind of like take advantage of the space tend to be artists and tend to be creatives, and they're the ones that are
have a vision.
have the vision for what it could or a new beginning could be.
I kind of feel like right now,
Yeah.
especially in the neighborhood, nothing's happening because of that law where the landlords get a tax break if they don't rent the space. You know, I feel like there's a little bit of that in play as well. So it's kind of good that you found, I mean, it's pretty amazing that actually you found that space. It's a good space.
It's a good space.
I
Well,
like
that's
it.
also
it's a really
fun.
nice space to show in. You know, I mean, I feel like, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like, you know, I could expand out an idea that I had started that,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't have space for.
Right.
Well, you know, and I feel like the show before that was over in 4th Street was, I feel like the work almost was, you know, in conversation with the space, you know, it was
Right.
like these little jewel box like
True,
little things that
true,
were
true,
like
true.
the,
Well, I think it is also really interesting to see even the like how different artists utilize space. Because like, for example, you've shown in all the spaces that we've ever had. So you showed in the Harlem location, you showed at the 4th Street location, the 3rd Street location, and now this, the Forsyth location.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I just feel like, well, I mean, I feel like part of my work is just responding to space.
To the space, yeah.
And then I just, you know, I mean, right now what's in there is just so, it's such a completely different space. It's interesting. You
That
know?
is interesting. Show to show with the gallery, it's like, it's crazy because like going to work feels totally different. Like
Oh, yeah.
when
What does it
your
feel
show
like
is
now?
up,
Okay,
it was
yeah,
one
what'd it feel
well, it was very calm. I don't know, there were elements of like home to it. You know, it was very like kind of like familiar objects, familiar kind of like
Right.
stuff.
I guess that's like when I go see, you know, Friend Obachan shows. Like when I see
Yeah.
the old work from the 60s,
it just becomes.
it just, I just feel like, oh, I remember them.
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of like siblings.
Or it's even, if you think about that too, your most recent show, there were a lot of things that I think I recognized that probably a lot of people didn't really pick up on, like the latex cast
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
stones.
Uh-huh.
Immediately reminded me of the teeth pieces that you were doing in the early 2000s, and then the encaustic paintings reminded me of the egg pieces you were doing in the 90s, and like
Yeah, no.
so I think having that, like, I mean, that is one of the, not that I was working with you back then necessarily. I was
were
just
in my
the
studio.
hanging out. But I do think it's like, that is one of the kind of great joys of working with artists over long periods of time, is because you do get to kind of see as series evolve, and as moments in someone's career can circle back to reference past moments or bring something out or put a new concept onto the medium of a past kind of process or something like this. So
Yeah,
I think
I also
that-
feel
yeah.
like there's some, well, I mean, I don't know, there's like a little bit of a love of materiality, right?
Uh-huh.
Like I've always loved that rubber latex stuff
Yeah.
and making the paint and stuff. I mean, growing up, it was always, you know, people needing to have like a body of work, a consistent body of work was the big thing, right? That I'm really against.
But it is kind of strange, because then there is always like, I do, especially now, like sometimes hear a lot of stuff about like artists trying to be brands and weird things like this, and it's kind of like, and I think that part of that is because a lot of folks from like the 80s street scene are like mega heroes now for some reason. So it's like,
Right.
and those people very much were like kind of making one ilk of work, and getting rewarded for making one ilk of work. Like, and then I also think that, you know,
You mean like a Keith Haring?
a Keith Haring is a good example.
Right. And I guess, you
Or
know,
even like
I
a
mean, I
Kenny
guess
Sharp
that's
of
the
sorts,
thing.
like
Yeah.
or a
Andy
even-
Warhol.
Yeah.
Yeah,
where you
I mean,
do
I guess
kind
it
of
just
like-
depends, right? I guess there's just totally wide open. So do you miss any of that? I mean, do you miss the stuff? Like you guys did like the Whitney and MoMA PS1 and the shows on the sub, you like all those
Yeah.
like minxy kind of like, you know, I don't know. I don't know how to, I don't know what the right word is. You know, like that kind of
No, I
like, you know,
think that it's-
mischievous kind of, you know, thingy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that
Do you
it
ever
was.
miss that, or do you think that's more like something
miss
like
it.
you're in your 20s, or I don't know. I mean, I
yeah.
loved it. I thought it was great. I mean,
I missed it. I loved it. I thought it was really important to do when we were doing it.
yeah.
But it was also like, it's kind of like this. How I kind of see it is this. That project was a lot of what at least I was thinking about during that was, what can you do in the sphere of making exhibitions when you do not have a space?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's what it started as, right?
And then that's what it started as, and that's when we started
that was the
utilizing
12,
the subway
right.
stations as location to
Right.
exhibit works.
And it was going to be the parks and like,
parks, and kind of, I remember reading up on a lot of vandalism laws to make sure that the works weren't endangered or weren't
Right.
in
and
any,
just also how people view work.
yeah.
Because that, I think, I don't know, I think that's still interesting, because when, you know, we went out and painted on the streets during that pandemic time when everything was boarded
right.
up, right? It's just, I mean, I was just talking to those guys recently about how, you know, it's just really different when you're out on the street and you're painting. One, I just feel like what I did was very different from what I do in the studio because it was in the street.
Right.
But also, like, everyone who walks by has a conversation with you, regardless of like, you know, how rich or poor or young or old they are, whatever. And they all have like super interesting things to say.
Yeah.
And then when all of that went to Howell, you know, which was great.
But it was a different environment, it was different conversations, it was different.
Yeah, you know, I just
Yeah.
feel like, you know, there's this like threshold to walk into a gallery.
That's one of the exciting things that I do see, and one of the great things with all the shows that, you know, we do, whether it's like the show that we have now, or even your show with like hanging over 200 and something works in that room like this, and like having that kind of like, I don't know, creating that, for lack of a better term, that kind of like museum quality kind of like aesthetic or feel of a space.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of curious if you had any feedback about that, about, well, either the show or the sound piece. Like, I realized, like, after the show's down, you know, you're busy with the next one, and
Yeah.
so then there's never any like, hey, so what was the reception, or what, you know, what was I mean, I'm just kind of curious myself, like.
People loved it. People loved it. I think it was really cool. I mean, like, people always like the exhibition. I mean, I think that it was really cool because it was like, okay, that exhibition, okay, for example, you were making those works anyways,
Right.
and you were making those works in the residency and stuff like this, but that was not an exhibition that I had spoken to you about doing at 4th Street or 3rd Street or whatever, and then was then kind of compiled to fit the space or whatever, stuff like this.
Right.
It was a body of work that had been in process for 3 years, whatever it ended up being.
Yeah.
And then as far as the exhibition of those, or the exhibiting of those works, was planned for that space. The only other exhibition that kind of did a little bit of a trick to make it feel like it was a little bit more for the space was Luke Ivy Price's exhibition. And that was interesting because that one piece was specifically for the space.
Yeah,
and then everything else in that show was created with the idea of it showing in 3rd or 4th Street.
Oh.
And then he hadn't started doing it because he knew that he had done sketches. I'd seen sketches of what he was going to do for 4th Street and stuff like this. But then it was really interesting because when I think the day after I signed the lease, I think he came by the gallery and he said, so I really want to make this piece come into fruition. And the only way that that's going to happen is you have to give me the exact dimensions of the walls right now, because I will not have enough time to make the piece unless you give me the dimensions right now.
This is before you built out the space?
We didn't have any of the walls that piece was on.
Right.
None of those existed.
I know.
And so I walked through with him and I said, well, okay, there's going to be a wall here, there's going to be a wall there, there's going to be a wall there, there's going to be a wall here. And the dimensions are going to be, and we held out the measure, it's going to be this minus, you know, the whatever,
Right.
3 inches of the wall that's going to be this and this. And I gave him these dimensions of this space that didn't exist. And then he went back to the studio and disappeared into the studio. I disappeared into the construction of the gallery and stuff like this. And it was actually kind of an amazing moment because when we were rolling out that piece,
It fit exactly.
yeah, and he said he had made these 2 massive scrolls, and we went and we're rolling one scroll to the other scroll until there was a little piece of tape, a little mark of pencil at the top in the very center, and he said, "Oh, that's it. That's the center." And I'm like, "Really? Are you sure? Are you sure it's all going to fit and everything like this?" And it was. It was really amazing. It fit
Well,
exactly.
he's pretty precise.
He's a very precise person. I mean, this is also something that I'm always curious about with everyone, and with all artists that I work with, as well as you as my mother as well. I mean, I think that I've always been wondering, like, you know, I know you grew up around art because my grandparents are artists. But when did you know or kind of like think that you wanted to also kind of pursue this career?
You know, early on,
Yeah.
when I was really little, I wanted to be a sculptor because I actually loved always making stuff with my hands, you know, clay. And then of course you grow up, and then I thought, I don't want to do this thing that my parents are doing. So I went to film school. And then in film school, you know, I was going to be a director, but then I just kind of found like I don't actually like bossing people around. You know, and it was frustrating to me when I would just try to do that and people weren't kind of getting what I was saying. You know, I'd draw storyboards and it'd be like, I want it to look like this, and then it wouldn't, and then I just started doing animation, teaching myself how to animate. And then I would do that, you know, so then I became my own, you know, everything.
Creator, yeah.
And so then from that, I just thought, you know what? I've always painted, you know, I was making these paintings and doing stuff, and then I thought, well, what if I just see if this is something I want to do? So I actually went to Yale for the painting program. And then I actually really just loved it and just felt like, oh, wow, this is totally what I want to be doing. And so, so then I applied for graduate school after that. You know, but at that point, I was married, you know, and your dad said he's not moving to California, he's not moving to Chicago. I was sort of limited in where I was applying because he kind of like put I'm definitely not going, you know, like not leaving this like little area, which was New York.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that that's why you went to SVA.
Yeah.
And then
And then just, you know, just the fact that this is, I feel like it's just in me. Like I just can't stop,
right.
you know, making stuff. Like even if it's, you know, like I spent that year without you know, whatever, when we were renovating the place, I didn't have a studio. So I had studio and a sketchbook. You know, so I have like tons of sketchbooks with all these ideas, you know, and I think that's where the whole, a lot of the real installation kind of work and the conceptual stuff, because it is all just conceptual. It's just like notebooks filled with ideas for installations. I have, you know, like a few of those sketchbooks full of them.
That's crazy. I mean, that's like, okay, that's also somewhere that I probably subconsciously or something like noticed that, and that's maybe one of the reasons why I kind of like look for that in artists too, is because it is the idea of just kind of like always creating work no matter what.
You're thinking about it all the time. Every time you're looking at stuff, it's just sort of like you're just making note. I just feel like that's, my whole life is just constantly like mental notes.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think that that's true. It is like, it's not like, oh yeah, one day I'm like, oh, now I'm going to be an artist.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
feel
kind
like
of
it's
like there
more,
and it
I feel like
happens,
if it's, I mean, I don't know because I don't know how other artists really operate, but I think if it's this, you know, it's a 24/7 kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just like, it's part of life. It's just how you conduct yourself and how you are, you know, looking at the world, I think. You know,
That's
I can
true.
only look at the world in
Through that lens.
through this lens. Like I'm thinking, you know, like these things about the environment come up and climate and stuff, and then it just, you know, I think, what am I doing? And I just feel like, well, you know, with my work, that's what I'm dealing with it in that kind of way. Like I can't ever make work about any, you know, about like issues and stuff, because for me that's kind of like propaganda.
That
You know,
makes
whether it's good propaganda
Yeah,
or
yeah,
bad,
right, right, right,
it's
right,
still
right,
kind of,
right.
you know, or that's like, it starts veering into the realm of like commercial art, right? You're
Yep.
making a poster for
Or
something.
cartooning or whatever.
Right. So, you know, but I just feel like obviously all those kinds of things just start like, you know, they seep in, you know, life seeps in,
Right.
you know, and it's like how it gets processed inside.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like you dream about it. Like I
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
whenever I'm trying to think about something, it'll just come to me in a dream. If I'm puzzling over like how I want to do something, then I'll dream about it.
Right.
I take it to sleep with me, and then
And that is kind of
sometimes
something
I see
nice.
stuff, you know. I mean, I think that's why, okay, so I'm going to go to India, right, and do this piece, and they said I could ask for any art materials I wanted. So I've asked, you know, for my kind of materials, like the sheep fleece off the Himalayas, you know, hand-spun cotton threads, marigolds, and then I asked them if I could have a tree sapling to plant. And I think that's because I had this wild dream where I was just in a giant art warehouse, and then I go through this, and then we're picking out work for an exhibition, and I'm kind of bored because it's a group of people, and I sort of like recede to the background, and then I notice there's this door, and I go through this door, and then I'm in India. This is just a few years ago, and then I just thought, whoa, but then there's this family there, this Indian family there, and then it's my family, and so I go over there, and they have this this tree sapling, and it was the tree planting. Like I had finally arrived for my tree planting.
Oh, wow.
So I decided, I told some friends about, you know, I told Christy and stuff about my dream, and she was just like, well, you absolutely should then plant a tree. So I think so I asked them for a tree sapling, and they said yes, and I could plant a tree, so.
And you're going to plant
And I'm
a
going to
tree?
do that. But that's the same as, you know, when the Bowery thing started happening,
Yeah.
you know, and I was going to paint outside, but I'd never done that, and I don't actually paint, you know, images.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And someone said, we just got to paint something that's in your heart. And then I realized I just had this dream, same thing of like, you know, walking in the sand, and then I look down, and then there's this thing in the sand, and it looks like, you know, like crumpled paper, like the piece that I made, you know, the inside. So it looked like that, but it was in the sand. And then I go and I grab it and I pick it up, and it's this very special desert rose flower. And so then I decided that's what I would paint first. And I think because of that, the whole project took on legs, you know, like it really like
Sure.
grew, and I don't know, I somehow believe in that kind of stuff. There's something going on there that I sort of listened to this thing, and so then that whole project, you know, became a lot bigger, and you know, and it just suddenly got, you know, all that press and stuff.
Yeah. And I think that that's also interesting, because I do think that of any type of person, artists do tend to have a really kind of unique connection or unique pathway between the conscious and the subconscious.
Well, it's, you know, I think of art as basically a spiritual practice, right? I mean, I think that's
Right.
sort of what I was trying to say when we went out to paint. Like the reason was, you know, it was 100 days of lockdown, no galleries, no museums. A lot of artists had no access to their gallery, to their studios. At that moment where there was just so much social tension and
Right.
tumult, and you know, all that injustice, and you know, so many things to say, so many things to do on a physical level, but I just felt like, who's speaking on the spiritual level? And so to me, that's what art is. That's
Right.
what, you know, because otherwise, why does this thing exist?
That is interesting how, like, yeah, people have always made art. Art has been,
Yeah.
someone told
You
me
know,
something.
from the earliest, you know, cave painting,
Cave
right? It's
painting,
just forever and ever. And yet it's not, getting food, it's not shelter, it's not your physical needs. It's a spiritual need.
Mm-hmm. It's something to explain or something to express or...
No, I just feel like it's a spiritual need, whether it's, because I feel like, I don't know that it's necessarily expression, but
Right.
because I feel like sometimes there's this more of an intangible.
Right. That makes sense.
Because we don't have a language around it. And so that's why I kind of also feel like with art writing, a lot of times there's, or wall text, and it's just like people explaining it. I mean, I feel like that's more now. It wasn't, in the past, but I feel like now I just feel like there's this like incredible amount of explanation to the point where it's like, you see that this is what you're seeing and you're reading it, and so no one's looking anymore.
Sure.
It's just like no one is actually having that like experience between this and that.
Right.
Because I feel like that, whatever is happening between this and that is completely valid, and that's the experience, and that's, whatever it is, positive, negative, it doesn't really matter, but whatever you're seeing is what you're seeing, and that should be completely valid. And I feel like there's so much explanation now about, or description of what you're seeing that it's taking away people's sense of being able to relate. It's like, wanting to get it right.
Yeah.
It's like, what I'm seeing right? Is it what, and so, and I just feel like that is a total crime in a sense, you know what I mean?
I also do think about that in general, is that art in general has kind of gone to a place where it doesn't, a lot of the time it makes the viewer more timid to actually view the work because
exactly, it's a dumbing down.
They don't feel like accredited enough, or they don't have the notches on their belt to see this properly, and so then they end up becoming afraid of having opinion, or afraid of actually experiencing the work, or just spending a moment with the thing and seeing how it is.
Yeah.
There's
so many different levels, and I feel like art itself is so multifaceted in a sense that it's trying to pin it down in that way is really limiting.
And I think that's also something, I don't know, that's true. Yeah, you don't want to limit someone's experience.
Yeah.
I also think that it's like, it's true, it's like art is something that's strange because it is, in some senses, really for everyone. And then a lot of exhibitions that you see, or a lot of the kind of success around art, can be very catered to an ultra elite of sorts. And that's a whole different crazy kind of like bag of worms of stuff like this.
Right. Or at least for some people, right? I guess I'm also recognizing some people probably could hardly care less about art.
I mean, that's true. I mean, I think that you coming from a background with parents as artists, and me coming from a background with a parent as an artist, I think that it's like, it's interesting because I think that I would imagine both of us probably have had an optimism towards art, or an idea that this was a profession or a career path that was like made some sort of sense, in a way that I think 99% of people like don't have. Because I talk to a lot of even artists that I work with that have had like kind of heavy pushback from family, from peers, from all types of things for pursuing something.
Well, you had that from peers too.
I had that from peers for sure,
Yeah,
but
but I
never as
feel
much
like
from
you gotta-
family, which was kind of like interesting. Because like when I remember when I got like kicked out of high school, and I think you said like either go back to high school or get a job or something like this, and
Well, you homeschooled.
yeah, but I also went to work for the storefront for art and
Yeah.
architecture and stuff like this, and that was because at the time I realized that, at the time I actually thought there were like 3 things that someone could do. And it was either be a artist, be like a dealer, a gallery owner, or be an architect. And I did at that time kind of like, well, I didn't want to do artist. And then I was kind of like semi-interested in the other 2 options. And then after working in a couple of architecture firms, I realized that with architecture that I really enjoy space and thinking about space. but the logistical kind of like nitty gritty of watching projects get crushed by the DOB and different things like this, I had no interest in. And then it was kind of interesting because owning a gallery and having a space like that does allow you to both think about space architecturally, but also enjoy art and have art as a part of your life, which I always do think is really important. And without, you know who said this once? I think James Rubio said it. Was like, he's like, don't forget, you know, art was happening before bread was being made and before wheels were around.
Yeah.
And before buildings were happening. And I was like, oh, good point. Good point. He said, this stuff is necessary. And I was like, oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But it's true. It is something that is like really deeply ingrained into human culture in a way. But I think it often in this kind of crazy world, people lose touch with it.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to kind of rethink and think about ways to make it, to tune people back into that.
Yeah.
And there's no better place to do it in New York. I feel very grateful to.
Yeah, me too. I'm very grateful to be here.
To be here and also to be in New York. New York is a wonderful place. I mean, you grew up in New York, I grew up in New York.
I know, but it's nice to get out.
To get out?
Get out and see the world.
See the world?
And then you just see this other perspective, like the whole thing, you know, like with the last show, with the Irish words too, and the Irish lands, you know, like the relationship to place is pretty incredible. Same with like Bali, like the whole place is like such a spiritual kind of island, or, you know, that people just dedicate like whole days to just creating these rituals and things.
Right.
You know, so it's interesting to see other parts of the world.
That's true. Other parts of the world. I'm working on it. I went to Berlin last week, and it was the first time I'd left the country in like a couple years.
I know. See,
and I felt so stupid when I came back, because
it's good.
The last day that I was there was the only day. The day I was literally flying out was the only day that I did anything like that had to do with being there. And I went to see the East Wall Gallery, and all of a sudden I was like, damn, I literally spent my whole 5-6 days there.
What were you doing?
And didn't do anything. I was just hanging out at Tevi and Emiliano's house. And it was like, it's the equivalent of like going to New York, and then you go back to your place and you're like, oh, how was New York? And you were like, yeah. And you were just hanging out at your friend's house in Queens. Like, oh no. So next time I go out to the rest of the world or into a new place, I'll try to get out there, explore a little bit more, do some other types of things.
Yeah, well, that's why I like the residencies, because you actually get to meet real people and see the real place.
Well,
you know what I mean? Because when you're like just sort of tourist, it's a little superficial.
But you're also spending
I mean, you
enough
see a lot,
time
and
in a
it's nice, but
residency to,
yeah.
like, I think when you spend a few weeks or several weeks in a space, you kind of like are able to really understand a place in a deeper way than you ever could in a week or two.
Right. Well, this one is actually going to be with these Indian artists. You know, it's 7 international artists, 7 national artists. So I'm really curious and interested in that.
Oh, whoa, cool.
So you get to really, you know, work with.
Are they
people.
local from that region, or?
I think they're probably from all over India.
Wow.
They hadn't chosen them yet last time I talked to them, so
Wow, crazy.
it'll be good.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
And you're leaving for that in like a week, right?
Less than a week.
Less than a week?
I had to get ready to go.
Wow. How long?
I'll be gone a month.
Wow. That's crazy. And then are you going back to Bali in the fall?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back and pick up my work.
Oh, no.
And then go to Japan to do this
The walk.
which was going to be a collaboration with Bob.
Interesting.
You know, I mean, I have to talk to him about whether or not we're still going to try to make a collaborative piece, but that was the idea.
Wow, cool.
So that kind of stuff is super interesting to me, to like actually work with another artist and, you know, in another discipline and create something together.
That's cool.
You know, is interesting.
That is crazy. Yeah, okay. I am, after this last trip, more open to the idea of leaving New York. I like the idea now.
Yeah.
It is kind of funny. What was Yeah, I really wouldn't have left New York if Sasha hadn't been in doing the acting workshop out there. I definitely would not have left to go to Berlin.
I know.
No way, no chance. Me leaving New York, very rare. I think I have to be very like.
Yeah, it's good to have a break too.
It is.
It's good for your health.
Good to have a break. Good for the health. That's true. That is a good point.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, that's true. Because like you're saying, even
expanding
with
your thinking. You know.
that's true too. And I also think, like you're saying, it's like with artists, and I think anyone in the arts really, like, you're doing it 24/7. You're constantly doing it.
Yeah.
Like even today, Mondays and Tuesdays are my days off of sorts. But all day I was just working on emails and working on things, working on planning events, working on this, posting this, doing all this stuff like this. There was actually something funny that, that Sasha said. She said that, she's like, it's so funny that you call them your days off because these are just your work from home days. And I was
Kind of the way it is.
oh, yeah, you're right. I see it as days off because I'm not physically in the space, but I do spend the entire day doing what I really usually do in the space anyways.
But if you love it, then it's,
Then you're always going. And then you take breaks. Like after work yesterday, I went to Long Island to go grab espresso machines out of the dumpster. That was wonderful.
Yo, check it out, Key. I went to the West Elm Dumpster and I found all these awesome coffee machines that are worth a lot of money. This is a Zura automatic coffee machine. That's I looked it up. It's worth $4,000, dude. And this one's worth $2,000. As you can see, they cut the wires, but I found the parts they cut off, so I'm just gonna connect them back, and then I have myself a coffee. How you doing? Yo, so I was thinking you should come, and we can go get the rest of these parts tonight at the West Elm Dumpster when it's dark.
That's like recreation for me. Is like zany things like this. Oh, I couldn't believe it. Oh, it was so great. And then literally drove, went, divvied up everything, assembled everything, divvied it up, popped in the car, drove back to New York. And that was like that's the equivalent of like my Friday night. Although there is never a moment I'm not thinking about the gallery, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, there's never a moment I'm not thinking about stuff either, but I
But
know.
it is
I
good
find,
to
sometimes you don't necessarily have to be doing it. You gotta,
That's true.
there's like
experience
breathing in, breathing out.
That's true. You can't always just go. You will die if you do that. But I think that's also, it's true, like with the gallery in general, I've for the last so many years really thought so much about like physically expanding, moving, growing, and it is really interesting to be in a place where for the first time, the space that we're in, I don't feel the limitations.
It's good.
Which is really amazing because
It's
I think that like I spend so much time.
I think you should just sort of chill.
I am. I know that this space is a piece that I have and will have and is relevant to have for the next decade. So I think that's really important.
And you'll be a different person.
In 10 years?
Yeah.
You think?
I'm a butterfly, taking my time. I'm a skeleton.